welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're stripping away the myths of the Renaissance to reveal the ruthless politics, radical ideas, and stunning innovations that actually built our modern world. When we think of this era, we usually just picture serene paintings and gorgeous marble statues, right? But the reality was far more gritty, cutthroat, and completely transformative for human history.
Okay, so let's start by defining what Renaissance actually means. It wasn't just about pretty paintings. It literally translates to rebirth, specifically a profound rebirth of ancient knowledge following a century of absolute instability. Europe had just suffered through tremendous disasters in the 1300s. Think brutal plagues and a severe decline in church power. So this period, mostly between 1350 and 1550, was an era of intense recovery. Intellectuals in Italy literally started looking around at the Roman ruins in their very own backyards, realized they were tied to this magnificent ancient culture, and it sparked a massive radical shift in how they viewed human potential. To wrap our heads around this incredible 200-year transformation, we're going to explore four main pillars today: wealth and political power, the shifting social order, humanism in the vernacular, and finally, education, art, and innovation. Let's get right into it. Part 1. Wealth and political power, the cutthroat Italian city-states. Because Italy lacked a single centralized state during the Middle Ages, several incredibly powerful city-states expanded to fill that void. But what's fascinating is how differently they all operated. Milan, for instance, sat at a crucial northern crossroads. They brought in enormous revenues through a super-efficient tax system, and they used that cash to fund literal bands of mercenaries. Then you have Venice, right on the water. They built a massively profitable global trade empire connecting Asia and Western Europe. Officially, it was a republic with elected leaders, but actually it was secretly controlled by a small, elite group of merchant aristocrats who pulled all the strings. And then there's Florence, the cultural heart of the Renaissance. Florence was entirely dominated by the Medici family. Guys like Cosimo and Lorenzo used their unimaginable banking wealth and personal influence to run the government completely from the shadows. But here's the catch. That unbelievable concentration of wealth made Italy a massive target. All that cash essentially sparked decades of brutal warfare. Attracted by these riches, King Charles VIII of France invaded in 1494. The Italian states absolutely panicked and called in the Spanish for help, which frankly was a huge mistake. What followed was a grueling 30-year tug-of-war between France and Spain, climaxing on May 5, 1527. Thousands of Spanish and mercenary troops arrived at the gates of Rome, and they hadn't been paid in months. Their leader essentially pointed to the richest city on earth and said, "Go take what you want." The troops smashed the gates, yelling for money, and engaged in a terrifying, bloody frenzy of looting that firmly established Spanish dominance in Italy. Now, watching all this absolute chaos unfold from the sidelines was a guy named Niccolo Machiavelli. This era totally shaped his highly influential book, The Prince. Before Machiavelli, writers always stressed that a ruler ought to behave based on moral, Christian principles. Machiavelli? He threw all that right out the window. He completely abandoned medieval Christian morality in favor of absolute self-centered realism. He basically argued that a prince acts on behalf of the state, and for the state's survival, your conscience literally has to go to sleep.
Which brings us to part 2, a shifting social order, from serfs to citizens. That ruthless new political reality at the top, it sent massive ripple effects all the way down the social ladder. The old, rigid system of the Middle Ages was evolving into a much more complex, cash-driven urban society. The ultimate symbol of this? The evolution of the medieval knight. You couldn't just be a guy swinging a broadsword anymore. According to Baldassare Castiglione's famous guidebook, The Book of the Courtier, the new ideal Renaissance noble had to be a warrior, sure, but also incredibly well-read, artistically inclined, and graceful. Their ultimate purpose wasn't just fighting. It was to use their classical education to honestly and effectively advise the prince, steering them away from evil intent.
Further down the ladder, city life became strictly stratified by cash, rather than just land ownership. Patricians dominated with their trade wealth, followed by the middle-class burghers, your shopkeepers and artisans. But hey, let's not romanticize this era too much. Workers and the unemployed made up 30 to 40% of the urban population, and they lived miserably on pitiful wages. And family life? It was basically a rigid business transaction.
Parents arranged marriages to strengthen business ties. Get this, sometimes when their kids were only 2 or 3 years old. And even wilder, you didn't become an adult just by turning 18. You only reached adulthood when your father formally went before a judge and explicitly freed you. Total, absolute authority. All right, part 3. Humanism and the vernacular, an intellectual revolution. This is where the ideas really take off. The rediscovery of ancient Roman and Greek texts completely rewired how people viewed their own potential, a movement we call humanism. Back in the 1300s, early humanists like Petrarch viewed intellectual life as a totally solitary pursuit. They were just searching for forgotten Latin manuscripts in isolated monastic libraries. But fast forward to the 1400s, and these thinkers didn't just lock themselves away anymore. They fundamentally believed that a liberal education demanded active participation in civic life. It was their duty to serve as secretaries to princes and popes, taking their knowledge of grammar, rhetoric, and history, and putting it directly to work for the state. And we can't ignore the language of these ideas. Before the Renaissance, elite writing was essentially locked behind the paywall of scholarly Latin. But then, revolutionary writers started using their local, everyday vernacular languages, effectively handing elite knowledge right to the masses. Dante wrote the Divine Comedy in the Florentine dialect, so everyday people could read about the soul's journey to salvation. Chaucer shaped the modern English language with his incredibly clear, relatable stories in the Canterbury Tales. And Christine de Pizan boldly wrote in French, fiercely defending women's intellect and demanding that women be given equal access to schools. Absolute game changers.
And that brings us to our final pillar, part 4, education, art, and innovation, the dawn of modernity.
The core humanist belief was that education could dramatically transform a person. And in 1455, one invention accelerated that belief overnight. Johannes Gutenberg didn't actually invent a single new thing from scratch. He was just an amazing synthesizer. He looked around, took the mechanics of an agricultural wine press, grabbed the metal letter stamps used by goldsmiths, scooped up the thick ink used by artists, and combined it all with the relatively new medium of paper. The result? The printing press. This thing completely exploded the spread of ideas. To put it into perspective for you, more books were produced in the first 50 years of printing than in the entire history of the world up to that point. Of course, visual art also evolved at lightning speed, but it diverged sharply depending on where you lived. In Italy, artists like Raphael were obsessed with striking geometric perspective. They wanted to give the illusion of distance and 3D space to celebrate the human form in a very grand, classical style. But up north, northern Flemish painters like Jan van Eyck did something totally different. They placed their subjects in incredibly tight, box-like, everyday settings, focusing intensely on the minute, realistic details of everyday objects to tell their stories. And it wasn't just paintings. The sheer scale of what humanity could build completely transformed, perfectly reflecting that humanist belief that we are capable of monumental, universal achievements. Architecture took a huge leap, moving away from pointy medieval Gothic spires toward breathtaking, perfectly balanced classical domes. Masterpieces like the Dome of St. Peter's Basilica, worked on by legends like Bramante and Michelangelo, visually shouted to the heavens that humans had entered a brand new age of capability and vision.
So, we've covered a massive amount of ground today. We've seen how incredible wealth fueled bloody wars, how the printing press completely revolutionized the flow of knowledge, and how the rebirth of classical learning reframed what it means to be human. The ultimate ideal of this whole era was someone like Leonardo da Vinci, right? A painter, sculptor, architect, inventor, and mathematician all rolled into one, a well-rounded, universal person. Which leaves us with one provocative question for you to ponder today. As our own modern world rapidly shifts and changes, do you possess the diverse skills, the civic dedication, and the insatiable curiosity required to be a Renaissance person in our modern age?